Welcome to the Superintendent's Advisory Council on July 20th, 2020. We're not going to take roll, but if you click on the participant icon, you will see all the participants listed on the right hand of your screen. Also want to remind everyone that this meeting is being recorded, and we are also live streaming this meeting today as well. So there will be other members of the public watching the meeting. Please keep your microphone muted if you are not speaking. This is an advisory council, so we want there will obviously be some sit and get from us, but we obviously want your opinions, thoughts, advice, counsel. So you can do that by speaking, unmuting yourselves. You can also use the chat feature. And we record the chat conversation as part of the meeting minutes and feedback, just as if you were speaking. So feel free to use that, or even if you just have a comment, that helps us out and helps populate our all the feedback for the meeting. So I know you all are used to doing this, but just wanted to review that. We have a full agenda today. And of course, time at the end for questions, but we'll take questions along the way. The first item we have participation guidelines with David Cook. You all know David. He's in our Office of Continuous Improvement and Support. David, I'll turn it over to you, and if you want to go over the guiding question with him as well.
Sure. Thank you, Commissioner. Good afternoon, everyone. It's always good to be with you. I've got several slides that I'm going to share with you, and the first slide will be the guiding question. So I'm going to try to get that up for you all to see. All right, everybody see that? I just somebody nod your head. Michael Favors, I see your face, so nod your head. You can see me.
David Cook, I got it, man. I got it.
All right, thanks. All right, so today we're going to talk about participation guidelines, guidance document that is going out today regarding how folks will both understand and record participation in this year, where we're separating our attendance conversation away from the funding conversation. We'll also have some additional conversation inside this document about some information on non-traditional instruction. So our question is today, what supports do districts need to implement the participation, recording, and reporting requirements for the 2021 school year? As you all know, by this time, you will be basing your funding this coming up school year on previous year's funding, and daily attendance will not be reported, therefore, to the department. Doesn't mean it won't be recorded for students who are in person attendance, which we'll talk about in a minute, but it won't be reported. What you will all be doing is reporting your daily participation in Infinite Campus in lieu of the reporting of attendance. Since a compulsory attendance is still required, it's still be important to capture and be accountable for the engagement and delivery of instruction to all students, whether in person in the school building or remotely from home. That is why we will be recording daily participation. Daily participation is a measure of the interaction between students and teachers. Those interactions will vary based on whether the student is in person or is participating remotely in instruction. Participation is a measure of the student's engagement in the instructional process. It is not a measure of the quality of student work that's done. That's why grading practices will still be in place. We are not using participation as a measure of whether the work that a student completes is of whatever quality. It's simply that they're completing work and interacting with their teachers. Remember that participation will be recorded for each instructional day in the district calendar. However, because of some issues with the way instructional materials are presented to students and submitted back to the district, you won't have to report the participation or record it on a daily basis. In terms of, you can wait till the end of a week, for instance, if you have a packet process where you're collecting packets at the end of a week. The teacher can go back and enter the participation each day of that week, as an example. The emergency regulation that was just approved by the State Board of Education defines non-traditional instruction as remote instruction in which the student is learning in a location other than the traditional classroom using digital or other alternative methods of learning. It's important to note this definition. I think sometimes folks think of NTI as that separate thing we do when we close school, but in this definition that has been placed into the reg, it's more a definition for any type of learning that's outside the traditional classroom. So that could be full-time virtual, that could be a hybrid model, that could be, and we're going to talk about that in just a second. It's about any situation, whether it's a group of students, the whole school or a district learning from a location other than the brick and mortar school building. Which brings me to this next conversation, which is what types of non-traditional instruction could you be seeing based on all these different reopening plans that you've been contemplating? The first, obviously, is the traditional way we think about NTI days, and that is when the whole district is closed to in-person learning and all students in the district are learning remotely on a particular day in the school calendar. You will not claim an NTI day for any other instance of or of a portion of students learning remotely. Only when all of your students are learning remotely and you are closed for in-person learning will you count that as an NTI day in the sense of how many, when we talk about unlimited NTI days, when you think about what you did in March, April, and May, those were NTI days. You may start the year with NTI days, but you may not start the year with NTI days if you're doing a hybrid approach or anything else like that. And you will also, because you all are approved NTI districts for the next year, you also can still use NTI if you chose to for more traditional non-NTI days such as weather-related closures. Other types of non-traditional instruction, which we have heard, and this is a list that we've developed based on listening and hearing about all your different reopening models that you've been considering. So these are all types of non-traditional instruction, but they wouldn't qualify as an entire day when the whole district is closed to in-person instruction. The first is obviously a full-time virtual school. Many of you are contemplating an academy approach where you think about a separate school function that in which you enroll students who want to do virtual learning beginning from the start of the school year. So that's a full-time virtual model. The second one is similar to that, but it's a school-based virtual model because some of you are considering that your virtual students will still be sort of attached to their classrooms. And that in that model, like a school within a school or some other way you might define virtual learning, but it's school-based. So the kids are still with their classroom teachers. They're just learning from home rather than learning at school. Many of you are talking about a hybrid approach where you might have a Monday, Wednesday, Tuesday, Thursday model where you do that, and then on Fridays maybe everybody is learning virtually. That's an approach I think everybody's familiar with. That's more of what we might refer to as a blended model, where the kids are getting both in-person instruction and virtual instruction, depending on the days of the week and so forth, or possibly even. That's right. That's what I was meant to say there. Partial school closure. I wanted to point this one out because people have asked this question. This is still non-traditional instruction. However, it's not an NTI day. And what I mean by partial school closure is that obviously it may occur, and we've thought about this quite extensively because of the way the virus is working now, that you may have a school in which you have some positive tests, but the whole district doesn't need to be shut down. So again, it's still a virtual model in that situation, but it's not an NTI day because the whole district hasn't closed. You're going to still, again, all of these models are about participation for students and measuring that participation. One of the things that's important to note about NTI days for the coming up school year, in the past, you've not been able to actually identify an NTI day on the front end prior to it occurring because you usually didn't know when those days were going to occur. But because of the situation we find ourselves in, you are able during this coming up school year to actually put into your calendar NTI days. As an example, your district may be using an AB kind of model where all students will be learning remotely on Fridays. And if that's true, you can put Fridays into your school calendar as NTI days. The types of daily participation, this is where it's important. Remember, every student in IC will have a participation flag, if you will, or participation recognition for every day in the calendar. If the student is in person school, in person classes, then that student's participation is their presence. So when the teacher goes in to record participation for a student that they have in the classroom, it's simply they are participating because they are there. In a lot of the same way that we record attendance, because we see the student sitting in the classroom. Remember again that this doesn't, you still have the requirement that student attendance is collected in the classroom for those students that are in person attendance, because you have safety situations and all the other things. You need to know where the kids are in the building. So you're still going to be checking that students are in the classroom, but you're not reporting that attendance back to KDE. For students that are in non-traditional instruction, and these are actually enumerated in the emergency regulation, daily participation for non-traditional instruction, it can be real-time or it can be outside the normal school hours, and it must include at least one of the following: one-on-one video communication or phone calls between a teacher and student, or a teacher and a parent when dealing with smaller children or students with special needs. Group video communication or phone calls between the teacher and a whole class, or between the teacher and smaller groups of students within a class. Student time logged into a learning management software, completing assignments, or finally, submission of paper-based assignments for students in a non-digital, non-traditional setting. So any one of those things can be recorded for daily participation. And again, you can record them at intervals less than every day. But you have to have something in every day's, recorded in every day for every student. But you can enter those into the system on less frequency than every day. A couple of things that have been coming up lately about participation and the recording of daily participation in Infinite Campus, and a lot of stuff is flowing out of Infinite Campus right now. Your people are probably getting new information all the time, but the blended learning functionality that's been built into IC is crucial to all of this working. And the one comment that we wanted to make sure that you were aware of as you think about the way you sort of label the kinds of instruction you're going to provide this fall and the way you enter that in Infinite Campus is the blended learning functionality in Infinite Campus has allowed us to create groups of students based on whether they're in person, whether they're virtual. Those things can be, you can use them for situations where you might have a hybrid model where some students are in person Monday, Wednesday, some students are in person Tuesday, Thursday. But the important thing is that you enter those into the IC system as as we just mentioned, as functionality using the blended learning model. It would be preferred that you wouldn't use the functionality to enter virtual performance-based for your virtual learning opportunities for your students. You can still do that, but you got to remember that we are going to be collecting participation and reporting it publicly through the KDE and as well as the legislature on daily participation, and we're going to be doing that, and I'll tell you about that in just a second, several times during the year. If you have something set up, like a virtual school that's set up as a virtual performance-based school, you're not going to be able to enter daily participation for those students every day of the calendar. That's because virtual performance-based functionality in IC was designed for the traditional way we would think about a performance-based course, where you're giving a pass-fail grade at the end of the year, and that is where participation is entered. So if you have things set up under virtual performance-based functionality in Infinite Campus, you're going to have an issue with recording of daily participation, and you're going to have to figure out something outside of Infinite Campus. If you have those things set up as virtual performance-based, you're going to have to create another collection mechanism for students that are in that model to record your daily participation and submit that separately to KDE from the mechanism that will be inside IC using the blended learning functionality, which will allow you to enter all students into daily participation, making it much easier for you when we pull reports about daily participation, much easier if all of your students are set up in the blended learning functionality. The three reporting times that will happen, so this will be a pull of data from the Infinite Campus system, will be in October of 2020, in January of 2021, and in July of 2021. Those are the three times which we will pull data to show across the state every district's district level participation rate, so that we can submit that to the Board of Education and to the legislature to show how we're doing in keeping track of all the students across the state in this year when we're without attendance calculations. Okay, that's the end of my presentation. Obviously, however you want to do this, Commissioner, I can take questions now, or we can wait until the end.
Let's go ahead and take questions. If you reiterate the guiding question, then of course we'll take any feedback questions that any of the members have.
What supports do districts need to implement the participation, recording, and reporting requirements for 2020-2021?
David, are you ready for a question?
Yes, I am. I saw your face, Casey, and I was waiting for you to talk.
Oh, I just wanted to let everyone see me. Hey, so according to your slide, which I'm going back, I took notes on. So the only way that we won't use IC to record participation is for a full virtual.
Yeah, so if you think back, Casey, you've probably had kids in virtual courses before, like dual credit or something like that. Those you are still going to build into IC the same way you always have. But if you're talking about you've set up some kind of a virtual academy in your district for the coming school year, we would prefer, although you're not required to, that you use the new blended learning functionality in IC to set those kids up in that virtual academy. Therefore, you're still going to be able to record daily participation for those kids. If you set it up as a performance-based virtual, it's going to be harder for you to collect that information on those kids in IC.
Okay, I think that gives me clarity. Thank you.
Okay.
Hey, David, Tom Cochran, Johnson County.
Hey, Tom.
So is the only documentation required going to be that participation, or are there other facets of documentation as well?
No, that's new for this year as well. The participation information that's being collected in IC, because it's for every kid every day, is going to be the extent. So tell your folks that handled all that SharePoint stuff last year that they will not be having to worry about all that SharePoint stuff this year.
Okay. All right, good deal. Thanks.
Anybody else?
David, there may be something over in the chat.
Yeah, I'm not reading Robin's. Yes, Robin, it'll be coming out. I don't know. Tony can probably answer the question about when it will be actually on the website under the reopening guidance, but it should be sometime today, Robin.
Yes, it should be. If it's not there right now, it should be in the process of getting there. We just sent it out, I think, about 20 minutes ago. All the superintendents should have gotten it this morning. So,
okay. Great, thank you.
Hey, David, this is Robin Kenny.
Yes,
Can
Robin.
I jump in for just a minute?
Sure.
I want to make sure that there's clarity to that question that was asked about, is this all we need to do in Infinite Campus? Of course, we would expect districts to have that evidence at the district level, school level, of the 4 different methods and how you obtain the information to count your participation. Right. So I just wanted to clarify that in case there was any confusion.
Yeah, thank you, Robin. I was just I was making a distinction between, because they had some requirements before to submit that stuff to us through SharePoint, which we're not asking them to do this time. So yes, you still need, obviously, to know if someone were to ask you, whether that's an audit or something like that, so how do you know that these participation things really happened? You have some evidence to do that, but you're not submitting that to us as you did this spring and in all years prior using NTI. So thank you, Robin, for making sure that everybody knew that. The stuff that they're submitting to KDE, though, is what they're popping into that daily participation in IC. Any other questions? I'll be on the rest of the call, so if you need anything else, you can pop it into the chat. So, Commissioner, that's all I have.
Yep. Thank you, David. If you think of something related to this topic, as David said, please feel free to include it in the chat. There are also, Tony posted, as well as Marty, some links in the chat as well. Our next item, considerations for reopening schools, exceptional learners, and preschool students. We have Greta Hilton, the Associate Commissioner of the Office of Special Education and Early Learning, as well as Veronica Sullivan and Carol Ann Morrison with that same office. Greta and team, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Commissioner. And thank you, Council, for allowing us to be on for just a few minutes and share some information with you today. Just today, we've actually released 2 additional guidance documents out of the Office of Special Education and Early Learning. The first of which is reopening considerations for exceptional learners and preschool students, which is what we're going to jump into right now. And then up next will be compensatory education versus extended school year services. We're having a lot of confusion around what those 2 terms mean, and there's really some conflicting information that's being shared just across the nation. And so we in OCL wanted to take just a moment and send out some information just so everyone has that readily available at your fingertips to be able to reference when talking about these two concepts. And first and foremost, let me say that as we work through this ever-changing landscape through this pandemic, know that, oftentimes, particularly serving students with disabilities, could indeed be some of the most challenging components of navigating everything that's going on in school right now. And we at KDE are receiving guidance from USAID's Office of Special Education Programs. And just know that guidance is evolving and changing. And as we get information, we try to push it out to you and your staff. But know that, as things change, some of this guidance could very well change, because what we're hearing from some of my colleagues across the nation is, in some of these highly litigated states, we are beginning to see some tension and some litigation and some dispute resolution occurring around, servicing students with disabilities during times of school closures and or remote instruction. One of the things that I will share with you, though, is in Kentucky, I feel like we have done a really good job, and kudos to you and your teams, because, we weren't one of those states that closed. And as the commissioner has shared many times, Kentucky never, ever said this is just too hard, so we need to close. We transitioned quickly. All school districts and the Kentucky School for the Blind and Kentucky School for the Deaf transitioned quickly to a remote learning service model, so that we did not have any delay in servicing kids. But know that, in the spring when this happened, and it all happened so fast, and we talked to you about how to provide a free, appropriate public education for students with disabilities, we talked a lot about how alternate forms of FAPE would come into play, and that, districts needed to make a really good faith effort in how you service students with disabilities, as well as being able and willing to have those conversations once we return to normal about missed services or what types of compensatory education that you might need to provide. And so here we are, a few months later, talking about the reopening of schools, knowing that even though we've had a little time, it still seems like we have all of the same types of questions that we had in March. It's just we've just had the summer to process things probably a little better. Can we move through the slide to the next slide, please? Thank you. So as we begin this conversation about reopening considerations for students with disabilities and students with 504 plans, gifted learners, as well as preschool students, a couple of questions that we would like for you to be thinking about are: what are the greatest barriers for reopening schools when you're considering exceptional learners and preschool students? And what suggestions you have for overcoming these barriers? We're hoping that, I'm sure you have a lot of questions and lots of barriers, and we're hoping that you can provide us with some really good suggestions that we can share with others as well. And just as an FYI, on the guidance documents that came out today, at the end of those, there's a question and answer section, and those are questions that we have received from districts across the state, and we try to compile those and answer those to the best of our ability. Unfortunately, with some of them, there just really aren't great, solid black and white answers. So with that said, next slide, please. So these are some of the big considerations, and probably as we think about these 5 bullets, and I'm going to turn it over momentarily to my team to dive a little deeper into these. But these are probably the big 5 for you to really think about as leaders in your district. First and foremost, students need to be provided with, or must be provided with, a full offer of FAPE, regardless of the virtual, or regardless of the environment, whether you opt for, as a parent or a family, whether they opt for in-person, virtual, hybrid model, whatever that looks like, a full offer of FAPE must be provided. I think probably the most challenging component of that is how to allow teachers and related service providers and other staff the time that they're going to need, particularly for hybrid models, to ensure that IEPs are implemented as written in a hybrid model or a virtual environment. It's extremely important that districts are able to share with parents and families what level of support's being provided to students with disabilities. The specially designed instruction, supplementary aids and services, accommodations, modifications, all of those things have to continue. One of the questions that we're hearing often is, can we continue to provide this alternate form of FAPE? And the word of caution that I would provide around that is, as we move forward, and we're offering, many districts are offering in-person or virtual or a hybrid model. The thing that we have to be the most careful about is that students with disabilities are able to participate to the fullest extent in whichever environment. So in other words, students can't be penalized for district policies or practices. And again, I think it's going to be extremely hard, and it's going to take a lot of time and effort to think through some of these situations. But I think it's a must. And the other thing that you may, IEP teams or in Kentucky admissions and release committees, ARCs, it may be that FAPE looks a little different in a virtual environment or a hybrid model. So for example, if you have a student with certain needs and they typically receive X number of minutes in a collaborative setting, maybe if you're doing a virtual one-to-one session, then maybe an hour of specially designed instruction one-on-one might have the same benefit as 2 hours in a collaborative setting. That's for the ARC team to determine. But it's important to know that the accountability is on that ARC team, which rests with the district. So that offer of FAPE, the IEP team is accountable for that. And then the other piece of this, we've had a lot of questions around, should we go to ARC meetings and change the location because students or change the placement because students may participate in a virtual environment. And I think it's important for us to think about location does not necessarily equate to a change of placement. Change of placement, placement is determined based on individual needs, and it is across the continuum of educational settings. And so just because a district transitions to remote learning, or if a parent chooses remote learning because they don't feel that it's safe for their child to attend school, that doesn't necessarily mean that there's been a change of placement. That's a location change. Location changes don't require ARC decisions. But again, overall, big picture, the important piece of this, the important thing to remember is that IEPs should not be modified or changed simply to meet the demands of the pandemic. Student needs don't change as a result of this. The district is still responsible for providing that offer of FAPE, and it's super, super important to keep the communication lines open right now, probably more than ever. And the last bullet, I'm going to turn it over to Chris Thacker to talk to you a little bit about some financial implications as we move forward.
Thank you, Greta. The first thing that I want to discuss, it has to do with the fact that the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act is just that. It's an act, and it's separate from the federal act under the elementary and secondary education program. And so since it's separate, a lot of the things that might apply to your various title programs don't necessarily apply when we talk about the IDEA, and especially when we talk about fiscal requirements. You may recall early out of the gate when the pandemic set in that the title funds were given the opportunity to have a waiver to extend federal funds for a year. At that time, there was no such waiver allowed for funds awarded under the IDEA until relatively recently, about 3 weeks ago or so ago, the U.S. Department of Education allowed states to request a waiver for an extension. Our office at KDE did just that, and very shortly thereafter received permission to allow an extension for the funds awarded as of July 1, 2018. Those funds would have expired September 30th of this year, But with this 1 year of extension, we have a period of availability now that expires September 30th, 2021. While that's good news, it may not impact many of you, as you probably, in most cases, have already spent those funds. But at least we did get that opportunity to extend those funds. And if your district hasn't spent all of those dollars, you have some extra time to do so now. One of the other things that comes to mind, and we're talking about maintenance of effort, is that the IDA has some specific maintenance of effort requirements that at this time there seems to be no indication from OSEP, at least not that's been provided to our office, about making any waivers allowable under that. Potentially, as it goes a little longer in the upcoming year, and depending on the circumstances, there might be a waiver to these, but right now there isn't. So what does that impact have on local districts who receive funds right now? It means you're going to have to continue to maintain the amount of state and local funds that you spend providing special education and related services to children with disabilities, or else you could be in what we call a payback situation, be found to not be in compliance with the Act. So that is important when we start thinking about how we're paying for things right now. I know that right now there's a lot of funds being made available under the CARES Act. Specifically under ESSER, there's a lot of things that local districts are allowed to use those funds to pay for, including things that are eligible under the IDEA. But I would caution that you give much consideration to how you do spend funds, because you want to make sure that you are spending adequate state and local dollars out of your general fund to meet the maintenance of effort requirement. So in the event that there is no opportunity to have waivers around the maintenance of effort for the school year that just ended, that you haven't spent other funds that would cause you to fail to meet that requirement. And that's the big gist of what this conversation, I think, is about. And one of the things we can look at in terms of that is compensatory education that Greta spoke about briefly. There are a lot of fund sources that you could use to pay for those costs. You can use IDA funds to pay for compensatory education that is occurring under this circumstance. You can use state and local dollars to pay for those funds. You could even use some of your ESSER dollars to pay for that as well. But when we look at the maintenance of effort requirement, you want to consider what's in your best interest to do. So that's something to think about, and a very important thing as we move forward. And now I will turn it over to Vanessa so she can talk about returning to school.
It's Veronica Sullivan.
I'm sorry.
That's okay, Chris. Next slide, please. There we go. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Veronica Sullivan. I am the director of the Division of IDEA Implementation and Preschool. I'm going to give you just an overview of the document that was released today. We, in response to the Healthy at Schools document, we began to get questions specific to students with disabilities. Those questions prompted us to develop this guidance where we would actually try to give some scenarios and some examples of how to implement the guidance in the Healthy at Schools document, considering exceptional learners and preschool students. So the document is divided into 4 main sections. We have the reopening considerations, which I'm going to talk to you about today. I'm going to go through that a little more in depth. As Greta said, there is a question and answer section for both preschool and special education. And then there's also a list of resources at the end of the document. Next slide, please. So in the reopening considerations, we've broke it down into additional focus areas. So the first focus area is social distancing. And in that, we give scenarios about differentiating instruction for exceptional learners when teaching about social distancing. Just things like providing additional practice, additional prompts, how to prompt particular populations of students. And again, these aren't exhaustive scenarios. These are just some of the scenarios that we've pulled together to provide assistance. And we also talk about one of the big areas where we got a lot of questions was what to do when students require staff proximity closer than 6 feet. As you all are aware, there are some students who have complex needs, and there may be one-on-one assistance that's mandated within their IEP, or it may be due to their age because of their specific needs. And so what we really did is talked about some possible examples, talking about assistance with toileting, some hand-over-hand assistance when you're physically transferring a student, when you're feeding a student, or in those instances where you have to engage in physical restraint to protect the safety of the students and others. So we go through those questions and those scenarios and talk about appropriate PPE, and that again is a lot of questions that we've received. And I'm just going to share an example about toileting a student that, you know, staff would need to wear gloves, a surgical mask, and a face shield, because a face shield alone is not enough to provide protection from aerosols produced by the nose and the mouth. We also suggest that staff may consider wearing a surgical gown if needed. But the main thing we do want districts to consider is that there are going to be unique circumstances for students with disabilities, these individual students. So really to think outside of the box and to contact your local health department if you need further suggestions on how to support these students and how to work in close proximity. The other thing we talk about is social distancing within the preschool classroom. This is a challenge in itself because of the population. And so there is a calculator that was released in the reopening guidance for facilities and logistics, on June 29th. And in that is a calculator that we have suggested districts use to calculate the number of students within a space. And so that link is available within this document as well. And we talk about itinerant staff and what they should do as far as providing services for students across the district. The next area I'm going to highlight is special transportation. Those are T5 students in Infinite Campus. And I just want to make one important point here. There's other information in the document, but if a district were to ask a parent of a student who has special transportation or is identified as a T5 in Infinite Campus to provide transportation for those students, the district must ensure that within the IEP, the district must ensure that arrangement is mutually agreeable to the parent and reimburse the parent for transportation costs. So I just wanted to highlight that. And also in reopening plans, they're because of to try to mitigate the spread of germs, districts will be making plans for food preparation and snacks. And typically that would be within the cafeteria, but there are instances where we would have to consider that for students with disabilities and for preschool students as well. So we talk about that in the guidance as well. And thinking about one possible example where this might be necessary to think of a plan is where a student may have the need for food or drink within their IEP or their 504 plan, and they may need that on the bus, for example. And so you would have to notify staff that needs to be provided, even if there is a unilateral plan of no food on the bus. So that's just one example. And then we talk about instructional experiences in the community as well in the document, and really thinking about students with IEPs and students with gifted student service plans. These students often will have considerations for some community-based instruction, or maybe for a gifted student, they may go to another school to get enrichment services. And so we just talk about thinking about virtual options as temporary alternative methods for providing those services during the pandemic. Next slide, please. Greta talked a little bit about least restrictive environment and the difference between a change in placement and a change of location. So that's in the document as well. But we do want districts to be aware that there will be a small number of cases where there will need to be an ARC because of long-term remote instruction. Some students may need to have that revisited. So that's just a reminder as well in there. And then the next section, we talk about cloth face coverings. And so I'm going to read this just so I don't get this wrong. According to the Healthy at Schools document, students who are enrolled in first grade and above and staff should be required to wear a cloth face covering unless medically waived. So in most cases, students with disabilities should be able to wear a mask, but there will be some students where this is not an option. It may not be safe for them to wear a mask, either due to their age, their physical condition, or their disability. So we just want districts to be aware of that. And if a student presents with a doctor's note that states that they are waived from wearing a mask, you do not have to have an ARC to implement that. You can implement that immediately. There's no reason to have an ARC for that. However, there are students who you may have to have an ARC for to talk about whether or not that student can tolerate a mask or it's safe for that student to wear a mask. And so in those instances, once the ARC has that discussion, that decision can move forward. And then the next section we talk about is school health policies. And some things we want districts to consider in the reopening plans is really thinking about appropriate wait time for students with disabilities and for our youngest learners, our preschool students, and really having a plan in place for those students who can't tolerate the wait times if they're screening for health entering into the building. So that's in there as well. And we talk about, we've had a lot of questions about assessment, how to administer assessment for eligibility and identification. So there are some tips in there about what to do in order to help make that environment safe. For example, leaving test booklets that maybe multiple students use, sit for 24 hours, not in a stack, so that they're able to basically air out, I guess is the best way to put it. And then wiping down keyboards in between, just those kind of tips to help with the spread of germs. The document also talks about preschool centers. So this is also a question that we've got a lot of movement on, and really thinking about ways that you can set up those classrooms for preschool centers, because centers are a requirement within the preschool regulations, but we want that to be safe. And obviously we don't have all the answers in this document. We've provided some examples, but we really encourage teachers to think outside of the box and districts to think outside of the box for those preschool centers. The last section I'm going to talk about is contact tracing, and just something to be mindful of. If you do have instances where students have to travel within the building to get services that are within their IEP, it's important that you find a way to document that, where that student has been, items that they have touched, for example, what they had access to, and also thinking about your itinerant staff, your related service providers, and your other teachers, maybe your gifted teacher who travels from possibly building to building or classroom to classroom, and how you will design a sign-in system to track those students as they move throughout the building. Next slide. Again, my name is Veronica Sullivan, and if you have questions about the reopening guidance, please feel free to reach out to me, as well as Carol Ann Morrison, who is our policy advisor. And I am going to turn it over to Sylvia Starkey.
Before we move on to the compensatory education and extended school year services section of our presentation, Commissioner, if it's okay with you, I would like to pause here and see if there are any questions about the reopening guidance for exceptional learners and preschool students.
Sure.
Does anyone have any questions? Or and again, I'll bring up the guiding question from the beginning. What are some of the greatest barriers that you foresee in educating these populations of students, and what suggestions do you have for overcoming these barriers?
Greta, I've got a question. This is Greg Schultz from Oldham County. If students, because of a medical reason, cannot wear a mask, does everyone, if everyone else is around them mask up, does there still need to be a 6-foot barrier? Can you clarify that a little bit?
Sure, and I don't know if Kay Kennedy is on, if she would like to weigh in on that, but from what I have, what I've heard from the Department of Public Health and others is that, if there is a student who is unable to wear a mask, or, even an adult, I guess, for that matter, then it is extremely important, even more so, for other individuals to have on their mask and for folks to maintain that 6-foot social distancing.
Greta, this is Kay. I couldn't have said it better myself. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or suggestions before we move forward? Okay, so we will jump into the compensatory education and ESY section of the presentation. Oh, there is one additional thing that I would like to add about that. David Cook mentioned a moment ago about the participation guidelines and how important it was, or it is, to touch base with students. One thing that I would add to that, when you have students with an IEP or 504 plan, it becomes more important now than ever to capture and collect ongoing progress monitoring data, as well as, a lack of minutes that you're unable to provide, because it will help you in determining these compensatory education services as we move forward. And so as far as Comp Ed and ESY, just to be completely transparent here, there's a lot of conversation occurring across the nation around what to call these missed services. And I'll turn it over and let Sylvia Starkey talk a little bit about it and go into detail. But there seems to be some concern that referring to missed services as Comp Ed is causing some tension between districts and families. And it may be the case in highly litigated states. However, I will say that Kentucky is not a highly litigated state, and I think that is primarily because of the work that you're doing in the district, as well as your directors of special education and special education staff and gen ed teachers. There's some phenomenal folks out there in the world of special ed, and I tend to pride these folks on not shying away from some hard conversations and being able to say, look, it wasn't our fault that the pandemic happened, but we are where we are, and we're not going to shy away from providing students with the services that they need. So whether you call it recovery services, which is what I think some states prefer to call it, and some groups are suggesting that, I will say that just if you're paying attention and you're watching the national landscape, the case came out with essentially a white paper to say that it's best if we call these recovery services, and COPA, which is attorneys and advocates, really was offended by that and issued a response to that, which was scathing. So shying away, it has its perks and its disadvantages, but we would recommend to just move forward and call it what it is, which is compensatory education, which is vastly different from extended school year services. So I will stop there and turn it over to Sylvia Starkey to go into detail with you about these two concepts.
Thanks, Greta. Like she said, my name is Sylvia Starkey, and I am the director of the Division of IDEA Monitoring and Results. And so today we're going to talk to you a little bit about compensatory education and extended school year services. This guidance document was created in response to some of the confusion where we were seeing people were really having a hard time delineating the differences between the two. And so we hope that this document will help your school district to really understand the differences and how we can implement both of those for students with disabilities. Next slide, please. When you are having these conversations within your district, and today our guiding question, I really would just like for you all to talk with us about what supports do you need when you're determining compensatory education and extended school year services for students with disabilities. Next slide. So when you look at the document and you have a chance to really kind of go through it, you'll notice that it is broken down into 4 parts. The first section really discusses free and appropriate public education during remote instruction. The second part will really go into compensatory education and some of the case law that has shaped that. The third section will go into extended school year services. And then the final area will be a questions and answers section. That is actually broken into two separate sections. One is about questions related to compensatory education, and the second set of questions is related to questions around extended school year services. So when we talk about free and appropriate public education, we lovingly refer that to FAPE. I know in special education we use all kinds of acronyms, so pardon me if I forget to say one, definitely let me know. But the important things to remember and to pull out from this document is when we are talking about FAPE, that regardless of the instructional delivery model, whether it is in person or virtual or some sort of hybrid model, local school districts remain responsible for still providing a free and appropriate public education to students with disabilities. As a result of the inability to provide face-to-face instruction, there may be certain special education and related services that are difficult or even impossible to provide during times of remote instruction. A good example of this would be things like orientation and mobility services that might have to be provided in person, or students who are unable to get access to a facility because of the way it's shut down and they're not able to get the services that they were entitled to. Those are some examples. But when special education and related services are not provided in accordance with the IEP, the individual education program, regardless of the reason why, it may result in a denial of FAPE. The remedy for failing to provide FAPE is compensatory education services. The goal of compensatory services, of compensatory education services, is not really to punish districts. It's just to place the student in the position he or she would have otherwise been had there not been a denial of FAPE. Next slide, please. Like Greta talked about earlier, we're just to take another second to really kind of talk to you about terminology, and this is addressed in the document as well. The Office of Special Education and Early Learning discourages districts from shying away from compensatory education discussions. We know that it's a really difficult conversation. And if staff use alternate language, it's going to be really important to acknowledge that any services designed to place the student in a position he or she would have otherwise been in, but for the lack of educational benefit resulting from a denial of FAPE, are indeed compensatory education services. Some of the things that we've had conversation with are terms such as like Greta talked about earlier, or we've also heard unfinished learning, lost learning, post-COVID instruction. All of those are often being used as synonyms for compensatory education. And like we said, we discourage you away from shying away from those conversations, but some district staff may feel more comfortable using alternate language during those conversations. But like we said, we just want to make sure that you guys understand when you're using that alternative language, that they are indeed compensatory education services. Next slide, please. When we get into the compensatory education section, we'll talk a lot about how compensatory education is really defined by case law. So you won't find a definition for compensatory education within the state regulations, and that's because it's been defined by case law. Punishment of the local district is not the purpose of compensatory education. Compensatory education is just awarded as a result of an IDEA dispute, or it can also be offered as a voluntary remedy by a student's admissions and release committee or their ARC or IEP team, whatever you call it in your district. One of the great things about doing that as a voluntary remedy is there's no dispute happening, or if there was to be a dispute that happened that said, hey, you didn't provide my kid with whatever service it was that you weren't unable to provide due to the remote instruction. If you have already provided those as a compensatory education services voluntarily, then you could provide that as say, hey, we did that voluntarily, and here's the documentation that shows when we completed it and how that all went. And you could provide that as part of the dispute, which would help you. Compensatory education, it's important that you determine all of those things and review them by the ARC on a case-by-case basis. Awards must be reasonably calculated to provide educational benefit, and they can extend a student's eligibility beyond graduation or age 21. Next slide, please. The next section will really talk about extended school year services. and it's going to talk about some cases that help to shape extended school year services when you read that document. But extended school year services are defined in Kentucky regulations as specially designed instruction and related services that are provided to a student with a disability beyond the normal school year in accordance with the child's IEP at no cost to the parent. The important thing to remember about extended school year services is that intent is not for the student to learn new skills or catch up. The ARC has to document in order for a student to become eligible for extended school year services. The ARC must document evidence that the student regressed in his or her progress over a break of instruction and was unable to recoup those school skills in a reasonable period when school returned to session. It's going to be important for you to remember that almost all students regress a little bit after a break in instruction. And so the regression is not the issue as much as they're unable to recoup those. So we're going to look at things like current regression, prior regression, their ability to recoup those skills, any kind of programming that's happening. So all of those things will be discussed in that document. Additionally, you'll find in there's a table that actually lays compensatory education and extended school year services side by side to help your staff really understand the differences between the two when you look at them side by side. It'll talk about things like what are they not, when and how can services be provided, when a student may be eligible for them, how to determine the amount of services, and how to document those things. Compensatory education services are documented during the ARC and the conference summary notes, and extended school year services should be documented during the ARC and the student's IEP. Following that, like we said before, there is a section about important things to remember. So it's almost like a cheat sheet, like a one-pager that you could pull out and say, hey, these are the things that we need you to really remember. And then following that, you'll find the questions and answers on compensatory education and extended school year services. And like we said before, while all of these things were happening, we were able to compile those questions from districts that they had been asking us about how to do these things and what definitions to use and how to provide them. And so we used all of those to help us to do those things. So that's all I have to talk about the discussion, but I do want to take us back to our guiding question. So the question for this section was, what supports do you need when you're determining compensatory education and extended school year services for students with disabilities? So if you think of anything in the meantime, feel free to contact me. Mine is on the last slide. Chris, if you can go back to those. My contact information is provided, as well as Carol Ann Morrison, who is our policy advisor. So you can contact either one of those if you read it and have questions later. We'll be happy to answer those questions for you.
Thank you, Sylvia. So this is a lot of information, and there's a ton of information in those two guidance documents that we released today. But again, just to reiterate some of the things that have been shared, first and foremost, obviously, is safety of students and staff. And it's difficult at best to work through all of the safety precautions and all of the challenges that you're facing as districts. And so we certainly don't want to minimize that in any way, shape, or form. But the other piece that we just want to draw your attention to is that the IDEA requirements, they stay in place. We are looking as a state for all the flexibilities that we can possibly find under the IDEA to offer those to districts, as well as OSEP. And the National Association of State Directors meet with the OSEP director monthly, and I'm part of that call. And please know that on your behalf, for Kentucky districts, as well as my colleagues from across the state, we're really working hard with USED to try to get as many of those flexibilities and guidance documents shared as quickly as possible. So We appreciate your support, and keep those questions coming to us. We'll stay on the line. And if you have questions as you move forward, please reach out to me or any of my team, and we'll help you work through these complicated times. Commissioner?
Thank you, Greta and team. And Chris, I'm sorry I didn't introduce you at the beginning. Thank you all for this great information. As she said, you may think about some questions, comments, feedback. If there's something in this, when you see the guidance that you both think we missed the mark or is not clear, please let us know, particularly during a time of a crisis and pandemic. You know, this information is going to change based on what we're hearing from the field and how we can better serve you. So that's why we have this advisory and the other advisory. So please keep that information coming to us. You're part of the advisory council, even if we're not meeting. So feel free to email us and let us know that. Next up, we have an overview and discussion regarding the Kentucky Virtual Academy with Dr. Marty Park in the Office of Education Technology. Before Dr. Park comes on, you will note that the Medicaid expanded care agenda item was deleted off the agenda because we have already covered that with you through the superintendent webcast. We thought that would be repetitive. However, if you do have additional questions related to Medicaid expanded care, feel free to put those questions in the chat, or we can address those at the end. And Dr. Park, I will also point out we have at least one superintendent that has a question that kind of weaves in, I think, to your presentation. Let's see if I can find it here. There were some questions over the weekend. Just to summarize here about, we know districts are going to be faced with potentially streaming a live streaming event of a teacher in a classroom and streaming that to students who are learning at home. And just the superintendent had some questions about the legality of that. And we've talked with legal, and we don't believe there are any legal issues other than legal issues that may be present in the classroom normally about privacy or anything like that. FERPA, those would be present, and even if you're doing it remotely. But if you could weave that discussion, that kind of a hybrid model into your presentation, that'd be helpful.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And I'm really excited about this part of the conversation. We have been working on this for quite some time. Actually, the idea, and I've copied and pasted the guiding question into the chat, but the idea of a Kentucky K through 12 online and virtual schools network is something that has made a lot of sense for us. I'll say since 2012, when we officially closed one of the nation's first online and virtual schools that we had operated from the Kentucky Department of Education. And so in 2012, when the decision was made to move away from a state-sponsored and KDE, Kentucky Department of Education operated school, virtual school, it became clear at that time to try to understand what it can look like in our state to provide options and opportunities for students for virtual courses and virtual enrollment, if you will. And so I want to share a bit, and it is more of a sneak preview, behind the curtains kind of approach to this conversation. I want to make sure that we all understand, I didn't catch it in time, and it's on me, but the title for this part of the agenda should really be focused on an online and virtual schools network, not an academy, a statewide academy. And I want to point that out very clearly because a single statewide school, if you will, is not something that we from the Department of Education believe is something that is the right move for KDE to operate. And I think most folks online, most leaders online would agree with that today as well. And so we've been working with a number of school districts specifically over the last 3 to 4 weeks, as well as some of our education cooperatives to better understand and try to help progress what we mean when we say fully enrolled or full-time enrolled virtual schools. And of course, that also can mean a virtual academy. But David Cook did a great job earlier to kick us off today. When we think about the different types of non-traditional instruction and the different types of programming, what's most important for us right now is that, and you've heard, and I've had the opportunity to share with you in the past when we think about and when we've really launched and got into our alternative learning strategies and models. Model number 4, if you recall, and if you were to go back to the original guidance document, was the virtual school. And so I want to take a second just to dive in on the fact that when we say online, virtual, blended, hybrid, remote, digital, all of these terms can mean different things to different people. And what we found over the last 3 to 4 weeks specifically is that getting everybody on the same page with what strategy you are referring to is extremely important. And I know that seems pretty basic at this point, but when talking to parents, when talking to community members, the word virtual can mean a lot of different things. So we want to separate or differentiate between when we have traditional in-person classroom teachers that are providing digital instruction, maybe that's connected through live broadcasting, as Commissioner Brown just mentioned. That's a bit different than a full-time enrolled virtual school or virtual school student. And so we wanted to dig in on what this can mean for us as we develop a network across the state. So full-time enrolled virtual school student is a student who is not enrolled or supported by a traditional in-person classroom teacher. Okay, and so that's first and foremost. We've known for a while now that we've had students who have taken accelerated courses, maybe online or virtual. David Cook earlier mentioned dual enroll, like a dual credit course, for example. We also have had programs that we've referred to in the past in that credit recovery space, where there's online or virtual or digital content that's used. But a full-time enrolled student in a full-time enrolled virtual school is a student who is not assigned a traditional in-person classroom teacher. And so we want to differentiate that. And I know I've said that 3 times now, but it's really important to us because when we're designing an academy approach, that may be, and David mentioned this, but I want to really push on it as well. When we think about expanding this network across the state and helping each other, and we're working with individual school districts or education cooperatives, we want to think about what's the right approach for you, and we want to help you there. And so it may be a separate A5 program. We have that in Kentucky already, where there is an A5 program specifically designed as a virtual school or a virtual program, if you will. But it also, for you, might be the right approach to embed a virtual academy inside of your traditional or existing A1 schools. And if that's the case, then we have structures in place that will permit that. And that can get you there if that's the right approach. So defining what you mean and what is best for you is important to us. Right now, today, we have about 30 school districts who are either in the initial stages or have a fully developed virtual school program, which have what we refer to and what we've defined as expanded enrollment. And so that is enrollment where you are through an agreement of some sort with other school districts, you are taking in students from outside of your school district. So over 20 school districts right now are doing that. And so in our developed online and virtual schools network, as we progress, we want to build a network effect and expand that work across the state to help as much as we can, but also when we think about what courses are being offered. So a few more points I want to hit. And again, we're not ready to, again, sneak peek kind of approach, but we're not ready to fully launch the virtual schools network, but some things to think about and some things that we will be providing more supports for. And I think, more network-based guidance around throughout the state. David mentioned it, but structuring your program or school or academy becomes important, especially when we think about the fact that virtual schooling and performance-based schooling designs are not mutually exclusive, but they're also not, they're also not synonymous. And so we want to separate those two terms when possible, especially now when having participation as a means for reporting is important to us. We want to help understand what brokering content can mean. Now, for KDE, that's not something that we would endorse. We're not going to, from a Department of Ed perspective, when it comes to curriculum and course content, we're not going to endorse any specific platform. We're not going to make any recommendations. We have no plans, and I want to be clear about this, but we have no plans to launch an RFP for platforms or course content. There's no statewide contract for online and virtual school content, but that is important for you to consider. And if you partner with other districts, if you are not in a situation or position where, as school district leaders, that you can develop something specifically inside of your school district, and you do a partnership with a education cooperative or with another school district, you want to know what that content is. You want to know what that platform is and make sure that it fits. Digital platforms can offer instruction. So the way that we think about this and the documents and guidance that we already have published is that the platform serves as an instructor, as an instructional designer. And so if that's the case, it must have instruction aligned to Kentucky academic standards. We know that already. And courses must be properly reviewed and endorsed by a Kentucky certified teacher. So in the network as a whole, we want to, as we expand and develop this network at rapid pace, we want to make sure that we can provide those additional supports around that. Some other, what I refer to as bumper lanes or areas for definition are the ideas of teacher of record, facilitators and coaches. We know that you need more guidance in those areas, in those spaces, and we're prepared, fully prepared to offer that support. And I'll keep using the word network because that's how we expand as fast as we need to. And the other thing to think about that we will be pushing pretty hard on is to understand and define the grade levels or grade bands in which a fully enrolled virtual school or program is offering an opportunity. So in some districts, there's a target and focus for 9 through 12 on a full-time enrolled virtual program. In other districts, we're already seeing expansion of 6 through 12. And then in other areas, we're seeing a full K through 12 virtual school thinking that is being developed. And again, those are full-time enrolled students in a program or school where there's not a traditional classroom teacher assigned. And that is a separation point. And so as Commissioner Brown mentioned, something important, there's a lot of, I call them design elements that come up. I believe that through this network approach that we will be able to help each other and help expand rapidly throughout the state. One of those is maybe a blended learning model, or it could be a full-time enrolled virtual school student who leverages live synchronous video in a classroom experience, a small group experience, or a one-on-one experience with a teacher. We do believe, and I'm glad that we're able to get a quick answer, but that is an important conversation to have internally. We do believe that our acceptable use policies cover any unacceptable uses of that. But in terms of a best practice move, having those live connections, those live, what we refer to as digital meeting spaces, those behind a learning management system where our students or participants have to log in, that's very similar to coming to in-person school and walking through a door and coming into a classroom that you're assigned to. And so from a best practice perspective, we think that we have some really good opportunities there to expand that. So I'm glad that question came up. That's one that we've actually addressed individually over the last several weeks as well. Of course, we're always going to say, make sure that there's a conversation with our board attorneys as well to make sure that your acceptable use policy, because there are some customizations in district-based acceptable use policies and other policies that we have, make sure that we're addressing those. So our guiding question today, what are the urgent design strategies and decision points for full-time enrolled virtual school students? And then, of course, how are those strategies different than hybrid and blended approaches? And we're very strategic with that question because we want to make sure to push on again that these are two different strategies that we have in play, and many districts are thinking right now about how to employ multiple strategies for success here. And so I want to open it up for questions. We know that we've received questions over the last 3 to 4 weeks, and we're helping individual districts through that, whether that's setting up a new A5 program, whether that's using the new functionality inside of Infinite Campus to push on primary enrollment through maybe a school within a school model, an inside of school academy model that David Cook also referenced earlier. So I'll pause and open up for some questions for this opportunity for a statewide K-12 online and virtual schools network.
So Marty, this is David Rust, and I'm the one that had sent the note to Kevin regarding the a little bit of guidance or some thoughts on streaming or conferencing with students who are learning remote at the same time that a teacher may have students in front of them in the classroom, and just trying to figure out how to manage that and work around the the nuances that exist, the management, the supervision, what happens when a student does X, Y, or Z in the classroom while a teacher is also conferencing with students online. And just wanted to make sure that we think that is permissible. And if you could just talk a little bit about how that model may look, I'd appreciate any feedback.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. So I think that as we've discussed, we do believe that model is permissible. We do believe that there's coaching that is vital in that scenario. And so, in other words, we've all seen examples of publicly posted through Facebook, hey, we're streaming class today through Facebook or through some other platform that may be a public offered platform. We want to avoid that, right? We want to avoid those missteps as much as possible. But when we think about honing in on students who are assigned to a specific course or assigned to a specific classroom, that we can offer that to students. If we think about having to log into something, then making sure that students are who they say they are, right? So all of those measures, we'll call them security or technology or privacy measures that are already in place. We also know that the partners that we choose to work with, we want to make sure have student privacy pledges and are not sharing, data about our students publicly. And so we have, those measures in place as well. There will be scenarios. It'd be silly to kind of think that there will not be scenarios that we'll have to discuss and dig in and say, well, this happened. Somebody took a screenshot and posted it online. That was inappropriate. I think in general, when we reviewed, and I myself have and others have reviewed acceptable use policies, we cover a lot of that in general terms. But generally an acceptable use policy is an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. and we have to think through what are the real practices that are in place and how do we coach digital citizenship practices as much as possible. We have reminders that as a classroom teacher myself, I might remind students every day of, here's what we're doing, here's why, and here's things to watch out for. Here are some pitfalls to avoid. So I think we do believe it's permissible. There's a lot of coaching that's involved, I think.
Are there currently any AUPs available from districts that may be models for those of us that are moving into this area?
Yeah, and this is another reason why in Kentucky we scale as fast as we do. Our KSBA Policies and Procedures Manual is my go-to spot. Again, some districts have customized in a way, and we can pull that together. That maybe have something specifically called out that may be helpful. But I would propose, and I think others online would agree, that we work with KSBA to try to update if there's specific language that we think is helpful across the board. That's usually a best practice for us. But we can share that definitely.
Thank you.
Great question, by the way.
Hello, this is Doug Bennett from Laurel County. I just want to ask a quick question about the clarification of students on NTI. On the guidance that came out, it notes that NTI is an umbrella term for instruction that occurs in places other than the traditional classroom. But it also says that the district will not claim an NTI day for any other instances of a portion of students learning remotely. So on the second page, it kind of suggests that unless everybody is on NTI, then it's not NTI. And the reason I'm asking is because of is there a requirement to provide meals to students who are on online education? In other words, if we have a hybrid program and we are broadcasting or archiving videos of the actual classroom instruction, would we be required to provide meals for students at home during the school day as well as those in the school?
So, yeah, Doug, I think that probably needs either Robin or Kay to also weigh in. You are right that in the traditional sense of an NTI day, which is what we had in the spring, where everybody was out of school, that was pretty cut and dried about how you handle food services and so forth. I'm not sure what the answer is about like a hybrid model or a situation where you might have some students at school, or maybe Robin or Kay can, if one of them is on the call.
David, this is Robin.
Yeah.
Superintendent Bennett, this is Robin. I think that what we have done is we have sought those flexibilities to make it possible for you to do that, so that when you have some students that are at home and some students that are in school in person, so that is absolutely permissible. I'll follow back up with you to see if it is required. Of course, your extent that you participate in the food service programs in the first place is something that is permissible. It's not mandatory. So I will follow up with our food service director to ask specifically about your question. But of course, we are encouraging the assistance to families that need that to the extent that local school districts can provide.
Hey, Robin.
Thanks, Rob. I appreciate that. The only thing is that we were told that it was required, and that's why I was following up. But I will thank you both for your answer.
Kay, did you have something else to add?
I did pose that question to Lauren, and would reiterate your statement that we'll follow up with her definitely and get that out. And I think in my email somewhere I do have a response to that, but I can't put my hands on it right now. So we'll get that to you.
Thank you.
Robin and team, not to further complicate matters, but a question we may want, and we may already have the answer to this, but is it permissible to have two, normally we have summer feeding covered us under NTI, even though it wasn't summer, but then we transition back during the school year to normal school feeding. I don't know if it's permissible to have normal school feeding for in-person students and a version of the summer program for those that are not in class but free to pick up. You don't have to answer that here. And again, I'm making it more complicated, and if we don't know that answer, pose that to our the Atlanta office of USDA.
Kevin, as far as I know right now, and we will follow up with Lauren on this as well, but we are now back under the National School Lunch Program, which still provides us the opportunity to do a lot of the things that we did as we went into NTI last spring. But there are some limitations on that. For example, under the summer food service program, we were literally feeding all students of all ages. When we come back under the National School Lunch Program, we are now feeding those students that are enrolled in our schools. So there are some distinctions, and we try to keep them very separate. But we'll follow up to see if we've received any additional information about the summer food program as well.
Thank you. And thank you for the question. Anything else on the for Dr. Park or any other subject? We can move into general feedback questions. I do want to point out we have added a new tab under the reopening tab. So if you go to the KDE COVID-19 page, which is linked at the top of the KDE page, and scroll down to the green reopen tab and click on that, there is a new tab for personal protective equipment and supplies. This is not an exhaustive list, but it does list some state contract vendors for PPE per your request, and then a state contract vendor price list. And these are all as of July 16th, so very current. And then just as an informational item, this is not a state bid contract, but we did list for your information only some janitorial cleaning vendors. If you wanted to, we had some inquiries from members of the General Assembly about information for districts that may want to hire third-party janitorial services to supplement your own janitorial services, knowing that there's a lot of deep cleaning ahead of you if you are having in-person classes. And so that's on there for information purposes only. Of course, you would need to have a contract. And then, of course, the resources that your co-ops may provide for these types of services as well. You may already have a contract you could utilize through your co-ops. But we did hear feedback that you all wanted this information, so that is on our website. And I think we have Dr. White with us. Dr. White, thank you for joining. I know you have a very hectic, busy day, but so if any of you have any public health related questions, Dr. White is here. And we're fine to open it up for any and all subjects that you may have issues. Superintendent Schultz.
Hi, Commissioner. Good day. Just a little bit of a question going back to the temperature checks. I know that there is OCR guidance that talks about you have to maintain the privacy of students as you're doing those temperature checks. And I know we're trying to do temperature checks before we get into the building, which means it's going to be a pretty large congregate of individuals. Any guidance, any thoughts on how we fulfill that OCR requirement while doing that from public health, from KDE?
And this is Dr. White, just to make sure I'm clear, the OCR requirements about recording the temperatures, or I'm sorry, I just think
about maintaining the privacy of, in other words, whether it be a lice check or whether it be a temperature check, making sure that student's privacy is maintained when we're trying to do this all coming into the building at one time.
True. So as we do here at work, they take my temperature and show me what it is, and as long as it's under 100.5, no words are spoken, and I just walk on into my office. So you don't record the temperature number, actual number itself. It's just the temperature was checked. So that wouldn't be any personal private information.
No, but what I'm assuming from a practitioner standpoint is that you've got 1, 2, 3 people manning that station. And as you take a temperature, you're going to have to remove that child at that point because you wouldn't want them to walk into the building, obviously.
Correct.
So at that point, everybody kind of knows there's something going on.
This is Todd. I'll jump in and provide some assistance as well. The United States Department of Education has provided guidance historically regarding FERPA the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. And generally, information that is observable by anyone who is watching is not an educational record that is protected by FERPA. So, for example, if I am a parent who is pulling up to the school building and I notice that a student is receiving special transportation services and assistance off of a bus, I may be able to observe and assume that they're a student with a disability, even though the school district hasn't released any educational records to me. Just like a parent observer could come into a classroom and see what is going on, the information that they observe in the classroom is not an educational record that would be a FERPA violation. I tend to believe that the temperature taking issue would be the same matter. If the district takes a student's temperature and it is over the threshold of 100.4, they simply direct the student into the office for further screening and for contacting their parents and putting them in an isolation area. The temperature doesn't have to be announced in front of all of the students.
Superintendent Schultz, are you aware of a recent OCR letter on that issue that we may not be aware of?
Actually, my general counsel, Ann Corson, was the one that asked me to ask that, and she is out of district today. So if there is, I'll have her contact you back, but thank you for the answer.
Yeah. If she has that and we haven't seen it, if she could get that to Todd.
Will do.
Thank you.
Commissioner, this is Terry Price, Superintendent, Henry County.
Hi.
Just got a question regarding some things that are happening, at least in my district at this current time. Right now, we have a planned open date of August 26th. With all measures in place, a plan created, all of that stuff. I'm getting some blowback from some teachers right now on the fear of starting back and so forth. What is our procedure for if the teacher makes the decision not to return to the classroom if that is the direction that we take? Am I allowed to send out something at this time, even though they may have signed a July 1 contract, something of a commitment letter, just so that I know the amount of staff that's planning to come back in the event that I need to hire extra teachers?
Todd, I'll have you handle this one. And then can you clarify, are you saying that the teacher would say, I'm going to exercise FMLA leave, or would they just say, are they asking leave under your board policy for a year-long leave as may be permitted under your policy, or what? How do you envision that, or all of the above?
Yeah, Commissioner, it could go both ways.
Okay. And Todd, I think you're working on bringing together a lot of the guidance issued in the past, because there's several leave provisions, not to mention your board policies that could play into this.
Yes, Superintendent, I had a conversation with another Kentucky superintendent several weeks ago and kind of talked through this issue because he was facing a similar situation. And in our conversations, I think what he and his school district determined that they were going to do is put together a communication that they were sending out to all of their staff that first of all kind of established the date that they expected individuals to report for services. It also went into detail about the steps that the school district was taking regarding sanitization, social distancing, requiring masking, all of the steps that they were taking to protect students and staff members who are coming into their buildings. Was also going to provide to school district staff members notice of potential leave options, and then require or request that they notify the school district by a date certain that they were going to be present on the date that the school district expected them to report to their duty station. And if they intended to not report to their duty station for some reason, whether they were subject to a quarantine, whether they were subject to an order of a doctor to not go into that environment because of a health condition, whatever the case may be, that would provide the district HR office with essentially a short list of those individuals who they needed to reach out to, determine whether or not they could provide some reasonable accommodation to those individuals, be it increased social distancing in the workplace, be it working from home via teleworking arrangement, or whether that individual was just going to utilize some type of district leave. So I guess the short answer to your question is yes, we are aware of at least one other district that is sending out a communication very similar to what you send out on an annual basis to determine who plans to return for the next year, but much more tailored to COVID-19 to set forth the date that you expect individuals to report to their duty station, the steps you've taken to ensure that the workplace is going to be as safe as possible for them to enter, what their options are, and then ask them to communicate with you.
So Todd, really, as far as educationally speaking, they could take the emergency family medical leave, or per board policy request basically 1 year of leave, or the worst case scenario would be to choose to resign their position. Those basically would be the three choices. Am I correct?
That's correct. I will put the caveat on it, though, but that emergency family leave is only available for certain circumstances. So you'll need to review those to see, if the individuals fall into those certain circumstances. The 1 year leave of absence that you're talking about in statute applies to certified staff only, and they can only, a district shall only provide that if it is for a medical reason. So the staff member would actually have to provide some type of medical documentation from their doctor indicating they needed to be off. And then, of course, like you said, obviously, an individual could resign from their position.
Thanks, Todd. I appreciate it.
Hey, this is Doug Bennett. Real quick, one other question: is the temperature 100.4 or is it 100.5 that would trigger a student to be sent home? Because I think both are kind of floating around out there.
You're on mute, Dr. White.
Sorry, thank you. Dr. Stack, who's our commissioner, is an ED doctor, and he's very, very adamant that it's a temperature greater than 100.4. So that would be 100.5. Now, I do know that there are some school systems that are actually lowering that temperature cutoff because they are trying to be, they're being a little bit more tighter on that. But that's that we've used across the state during this COVID-19 outbreak in Kentucky.
Thank you.
Superintendent Rust.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner. I had two questions which aren't related at all to one another. The first one is in regard to Senate Bill 1 and the expectation that classroom doors remain closed at all times, while slightly conflicting with our need to ventilate some of our older buildings and try to keep doors and windows open when we are able to do that. And I just wonder if there's going to be any help with that in regards to Senate Bill 1, because I think it would help many of us if we're able to keep some of those doors open. And it would also reduce some more door handles we have to keep sanitized and clean as kids have to move and go to the restroom and those kinds of things.
Go ahead, Dr. White. Go ahead.
I listened into the training that Eastern Kentucky University has put together for our local health department environmentalists and for educators, and they talked very much about the need to do ventilation, opening the doors before and after school. So they were not necessarily recommending it during the school day while the kids were in class, or setting some times when the kids weren't in class. So they've addressed that, and I know that Ben Wilcox, his evaluators are going to be taking that course, I think, Wednesday of this week. I'm pretty sure it's Wednesday of this week, and I know some of our health department environmentalists have done that as well. So we're hoping that we can provide that proper ventilation without getting into a situation where you've actually got children sitting or students sitting in a classroom with open doors. So we're trying to be very cognizant of those safety issues for for your students, as well as safety issues for the air. So I think they've come up with a plan that will be very doable and less disruptive.
And Kelly, can you tell us when there's a document coming out that has to do with a lot of these logistics, traffic flow, drills?
Yeah, that's already out. Kay,
is
do
it
you want
out?
to touch
Okay.
on that?
Yeah.
Yes, this is Kay. First of all, to the point that Dr. White was making, Ben Wilcox is a part of the conversation and is prepared to work with school districts through his area representatives on any special situations that you would like to pursue a waiver for allowing improved ventilation. So he will be, as Dr. White said, he's been part of the conversation, and he will be communicating to school districts about any process that they develop that allows you to do that waiver. And with respect to other safety requirements, again, depending upon the age of your building and the filtration system that you have in place, and your ability to turn that air over multiple times during the day is good. One of the recommendations is certainly not cost effective, but during the time of pandemic, it probably needs to be considered, and that is running your systems 24/7. Most thermostat or those electronic type operations cut service down when the building is not in operation, and that may need to be reconsidered during this time. But again, if there are specific issues that you would like for us to address, I would encourage you to forward those questions to me, would work, or to Greg Dunbar in our facilities group, and we will get you answers or assistance as best we can.
Eastern Kentucky University has a school of public health, but their main, their major focus that they have is training environmentalists. They have a real emphasis on that, and they've got some really very knowledgeable, high-powered folks doing this. I was extremely impressed with their training plan.
Okay, thank you very much. And my second completely unrelated question, Commissioners, is in regard to the town hall that's being hosted later on this week. Just trying to understand, as most of us have spent a lot of time getting feedback from stakeholders, including teachers, kind of where we see that going, what the purpose is, and what we intend out of the outcome from that.
Thank you for the question. The town hall is envisioned to provide state level updates. Basically, we're going to go over the Department of Public Health, the flagship document as we call it. We're not going to get into local reopening issues. We're going to outline that document, the five main areas. So it will in many ways be a repeat of what you've heard Dr. Stack say, Dr. White say, when I was at the governor's press conference on releasing that, what I said. We're going to have Dr. Stack on to give kind of a pep talk about the background from the public health perspective of the need for masking, contact tracing, how all that works together, testing. And then we're going to have an overview of the state level guidance documents, not in detail, but where to find those guidance documents on the website and what those guidance documents address at a very high level, and then question and answers. But we're only going to be reviewing and taking questions that pertain to those issues that I just described, not reopening issues. My guess is your teachers probably won't have many tuning in because they were probably well informed, as are, I would guess, all the other districts that are on this call. We have been getting reports. The Lieutenant Governor has gotten a lot of correspondence, as well as KEA and other groups from teachers and other staff members, certified and classified, just simply not knowing information. There are some rumors out there that SBDM authority has been waived, and so it's just an effort to communicate with them the state level information, not to replace anything you're doing, and hopefully it will be used in conjunction with what you're already doing at a local level, be that social media or your own webcast. So we had heard enough from the field that there's some pockets out there where either, of course, they may not be paying attention, but some pockets out there where the information had not been delivered or had not been received. And so it's another attempt on our part just to share that information in a virtual format.
Thank you.
And Superintendent Russ, if I may, I was just going to let you know, we'll be sending out that Google form. I think you had asked, I can't remember, one of you guys had asked earlier, should be coming out here within the next 15 to 20 minutes. And everybody will be able to tune in via the same KDE portal that you use for the webcast.
Yes, the forum obviously is not limited just to staff. It's open to superintendents as well, and for that matter, the general public. Superintendent Lively.
Commissioner Brown, I just wanted to get some clarification from Todd. Again, I have down here, because I think we're all running into this problem. We're going to have some teachers that just don't feel comfortable coming back. And obviously, we want to be sympathetic to that, but also consistent in accordance with what our policies are as well as the statutes. So I have down FMLA leave, disability leave, educational leave was even one, I guess, if you're on a sabbatical or something along those lines. But Todd had mentioned that the board approved leave for up to a year. What is that?
Superintendent Lively, that is set forth in state statute, and I can get it for you and send it to you via email after this presentation. You probably have a board policy on it already if you subscribe to the KSBA policy service, because I suspect that they have it in there. But state law requires leave. It does not require that it be paid, but it requires leave be granted to teachers, certified staff within your school district up to 2 school years for medical reasons. And it shall be granted for those reasons. It may be granted for educational opportunities that you mentioned, like sabbatical. But if the teacher has some type of disabling condition and a doctor's statement that says they need to be off, one of the issues mentioned is maternity. It could be used for maternity leave, or if a teacher is being treated as a result of cancer, something of that nature. School districts are required to essentially hold their position for them for up to 2 school years, Now, whether or not that leave would be paid would be dependent on whether or not the individual had some type of paid leave status that they could be off on. I hope that clarifies.
It does, and it's 03-1235 that has the professional training in it, but I could not find anything in regards to the medical leave in there. But basically, it's just unpaid leave with board approval, correct?
Unless they have some type of other leave to paid leave status to pay them during that time.
Thank you.
And not to further complicate matters, but we are going to be asking the State Board of Education to pass an emergency regulation at the August meeting. And we anticipate a memo coming out from myself and Lieutenant Governor this week under the Governor's Executive Order Authority that puts it back in place, the emergency leave provisions from Senate Bill 177 from last semester that just applied last year for the pandemic, and that would allow your board to grant emergency leave. It just expands your board's ability to grant emergency leave beyond the 3 days in statute to basically an unlimited amount for the next school year. But it's at your board's discretion for the specifically related to COVID. Todd, anything else on that? Did I summarize that correctly?
Yes, that's correct. As you indicated, Commissioner, we anticipate that memorandum, and we will distribute that to everyone, and also anticipate an emergency regulation before the state board that will set forth the requirements and parameters for that emergency leave that may be granted by a local school district, but is not required to be granted.
Todd's office is in the process of putting all of these together in a page or two document that will be distributed to you, as well as he'll distribute that to the Council of School Board Attorneys, just so everybody's on the same page with all these this menu of potential leave options that are out there. And it gets complicated, when you start factoring in the federal emergency, FMLA, and all of that. Superintendent Schultz.
I'm sorry. Thanks. we had talked a couple of weeks ago, and I forget it was either on this meeting or the Tuesday superintendent webcast about the possibility of getting some PSAs or some real easy to understand information with like contact tracing to provide some uniformity across all districts. Because I know every superintendent's getting the same questions I'm getting, and if you're not, you're lucky. But some way to try to help our teachers understand that what we're proposing, that there will be safety within the classrooms. Because right now, social media is just killing our efforts, and I can't compete with Twitter and Facebook. And so if something can come out from the state that would help us with that, to establish that if we are masked up, if we are hand sanitizing, if we are doing all the things that we're supposed to be doing, that it will be a safe environment to teach in. Because right now, that's what we're battling with some teachers, is just a lot of fear. And we need some I guess, medical voices or some reasoned voices outside of just local control.
We have flagged that issue for communication from public health working with the department. I don't know where we are with that. Dr. White, Tony, Kay, I'm not sure where we are with that. And if you have an update, you can. Primarily that poster, or I guess for lack of a better word, a poster, was designed to help you explain to your community. I think we were thinking of it more in terms of when you had a positive case, that when you got into using contact tracing, you can go in there in a surgical way and isolate the students. And it was designed to give you information to share with parents and the community to allay their fears that the rest of the school is okay. We've had a case over here, but here are the things we do and we know that this part of the school was not exposed or had a very reduced likelihood of exposure. I don't know that we can produce a document that just guarantees safety. I've heard Dr. Stack talk about, safety is not necessarily the best term. It's reduction of risk. And Dr. White, was I listening correctly to that? Is that right? So
Yes.
That if you do these things, if you follow the expectations, you are greatly reducing risk of spread. Mm-hmm. It is, I think maybe a step too far to say if you do everything, you're 100% safe. We're already hearing reports of things in athletic events, et cetera, where I believe certain measures were put in place, and maybe not to the extent that was necessary, but we do have spread in some of those locations. So can you comment any further on that?
Well, in response to the superintendent, and I'm sorry I did not catch your name, we did mention, and I believe it was just last week, if we could come up with some kind of a PSA that says this is what we're doing in our school, these are the safety expectations we're doing in our school, and if there is a case, we have a plan. And then a second PSA that would say, we've had a case, we're following our plan, and the children or the students remaining in the classroom now after this outbreak are safe because, as you said, Commissioner, we have surgically extracted and quarantined those students that were at high risk, and everyone else is safe to continue with school. Is that correct? Did I hear that right? Those were the two PSAs you were talking about. Is that correct?
Are you asking me or are you asking the commissioner? I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry. I was asking you, was that what y'all requested? Because I haven't acted on it. I thought that was something that KDE was doing, but as you spoke it sounds to me like it's more of a contact tracing kind of thing, and maybe that we need to at least put our contact tracing team needs to put some language together and give to KDE and then work on what that should say, if that's what if I'm understanding you correctly.
I think that would definitely help. I guess what I'm looking for is that I think everyone on this call and the majority of folks realize the importance of face-to-face instruction. We're all working towards that, but we need some help on battling the fear. And I'm not saying it's illegitimate or not. I'm just saying that is out there. And Mr. Price was alluding to it as well, is anything we can get from a statewide thing, whether it be the governor when he's talking about reopening schools and how following these safety procedures. I'm just looking for any help that I can get beyond just my local district, and I'm sure other superintendents would appreciate that as well, to help spread that message is what I'm looking for.
Dr. White, I think you summarized the two. I think we do need two documents. And or if we could get a PSA that would go on social media, but ideally start with the two documents. And if Tony, Kay, if you all can work with Dr. White, they can give us the information that needs to be on the two documents, and then we can get it to KY Stats to put it in a poster, just like we did for the reopening 5 areas for those posters. And KY Stats should be able to turn that around pretty quickly.
And would it be helpful to even have a PSA that the local entity could read and record for their local school district? You know, you record it in Connie County, and then everybody that goes to Connie High School knows that the commission, the principal or the superintendent is saying this is what we're doing locally. We could maybe craft that as well.
Hey,
That
this
would
is
help
Kelly.
me.
I think
You know, there's a lot of superintendents on here. I don't want you to create something just for Greg Schultz. I mean, I like other superintendents to weigh in on that.
this is Kelly. I think we also, Dr. White, had talked about maybe trying, and I can't remember the gentleman's name. You know, he did one press conference with the governor and one superintendent's call probably a month to 6 weeks ago, but we had also possibly talked about having that gentleman come to a superintendent's webcast, the contact tracing gentleman, and to kind of, because both of those were kind of rushed, and really have him walk through step by step what that's going to look like through each county with their local health department to kind of help the schools prepare for that, because you know we know that's going to happen. So if you could help us get that gentleman on a webcast, that would be much appreciated.
You're muted.
Yeah, I keep muting myself. I can certainly get Mark Carter to be on that call. He's leading our contact tracing.
That would be perfect. In fact, if we could get him next week, if you could see if he could come on next week between, well, you know, 2 and 4 would be great.
Okay, let me see what I can do.
And I do think, go ahead.
I was going to say, we'll certainly pull something together that covers the bullets that we're wanting in these two PSAs as well as posters, so you can post that on social media. I'm not on social media, so I don't know what you need, so somebody else will have to tell me. But we can get the bullet points together for accuracy, and then have Tony and smart people like that put it together and make it look nice and sound nice.
No, and Superintendent Schultz, to your comments, I don't think that it'll be just you. I think this would be very helpful for a lot of superintendents and for districts. If anything, just kind of like the Healthy at School posters that we have done, you can either put them up in your buildings if you are returning to school, or you can also send them out to your families via via an email attachment or something. So we'll get to work on that for you.
All right, these very good feedback. And Superintendent Webb had to jump off. I apologize, Superintendent Webb, if you're watching this later. We didn't get to your question. I know we're at our time, but anything else from any of you, we can certainly go a little longer if need be.
If I can, Commissioner, real fast, I just want to add something to what Superintendent Schultz was saying regarding teachers. You know, when we listen to, talking with teachers about the reduction of risk to spread, I think that is what they are not hearing. They're probably looking at many different sources of information, not just Dr. White, Kentucky Public Health, and not just KDE. I'm afraid that they're looking at other things. And for example, my district is a close proximity to Jefferson County. And they keep bringing up the Jefferson County issue, but understand I have under 2,000 students as compared to 100,000. So what Jefferson County does not affect me. My point is, I think sometimes the teachers are being extremely literal with all of these different guidelines. Now, I'm not saying not to follow those guidelines, because we're doing our best to create that healthy at work environment with hallway traffic patterns, plexiglass, hand sanitizing, social distancing, but they're not wanting to hear that from me. And then when I talk about, okay, well, the reduction of risk to spread, that may be something that would add just a little bit of difference to their thought process.
Very good feedback. Anything else? Superintendent Faulkner, did you have a comment or a question? I saw you on come up a second ago.
No, I just was seeing if my video worked, actually.
He's preparing for tonight.
Yeah, with all this information.
Just a quick overview of the week ahead. I hate to feel this way, but I feel like it may be one of our toughest weeks ahead. With the governor reinstituting the daily press conferences, which is not good news, just due to, I'm sure, the fact of the increased number of cases. So if you're able to watch the press conference, often a lot of information on there relevant to our work. Today at 4 o'clock and every day this week, as I understand it. We have the superintendent call tomorrow. The webcast as normal every Tuesday will be from 2 to 4. And then Thursday, of course, as we discuss the school reopening town hall for educators and support staff. And I know that you are facing difficult decisions and pressures as your neighboring district may be doing something different than you plan on doing. And I know that's tough. My advice to you is to continue communicating. And if you think you're communicating too much, then you're probably doing it about right. And to continue that conversation with your local health department as the situation continues to evolve in all the communities. And Superintendent Rust, I'll let you have the last comment or question.
Okay, real quick, just getting back to what Superintendent Price had mentioned in regards to thoughts of teachers and moving forward. I think one of the concerns that we are starting to feel is the fact that what I'm hearing bubbling up is that, you know, we shut down schools in March when we had far fewer positive infections than we are now seeing, and a concern that why are we now considering opening when we're seeing a greater risk, or at least a greater infection than with positive results coming back than what we saw in March. And I guess my question is there a threshold by which we can know that there may be the possibility of shutting us down anyway? Because I think a lot of us are fearful that we're doing all this work, putting all these plans together, and it's all going to be for naught as things get shut down, as things continue to digress.
Well, I certainly think that's a possibility. There's no secret plan out there that, you know, I know about, or the governor knows about, or Dr. White knows about, that we're just leading you all along. And yeah, we're going to close it down next week, but it is a possibility. You know, I don't think anybody really expected that we would have this strong uptick, but I think we're seeing the results of, as the governor said last week, you know, we all got a little bit lax in June, and you know, it was understandable because of being in the situation we were in for so many months with the holidays around and the summer, and now we're seeing increased cases, people traveling, coming back. So everything I think is still on the table, which is why we've asked you all to have these playbooks and have these plans in place. You've heard the governor say that he said this publicly, and he said this privately to me as well, about how we're hopeful, and we still are hopeful, that the mask mandate from several weeks ago will start bearing some fruit. And we're now entering the week, I guess, where we would see some fruit from that, Dr. White, and correct me if I'm wrong. That is why I think we still are remaining hopeful that we can begin school in a somewhat normal fashion at some point this fall, assuming that we are continuing to increase mask usage. The one thing that is a little different, though, from the spring is that we have more tools available to us through contact tracing, increased testing. In the spring, we did not have, the late winter and spring, we did not have the ability to go in and surgically look at a classroom and pull out Kevin and Connie because they were exposed, and then the rest of the class can can continue on. We didn't have that capability. So there is some good news there that maybe makes us a little more, have more of an opportunity to continue in-person classes. But I agree that it's, even though you have made plans, there is a chance that there could be a recommendation from the governor, just like we had in the spring, depending on what the virus is doing.
In March, I mean, we knew nothing about this virus. We knew nothing about face masks. We knew nothing about anything. It was only a few months ago, but it seems like a lifetime ago. And even if this were to happen, and I agree with the commissioner, there's no secret plan going on here. If, let's say that schools were closed in 3 weeks, they're probably not going to be closed until the vaccine is given, and so school will very likely reopen again. I mean, I'm just speculating. This is not a medical position of the cabinet, but this may come and go depending on the numbers of the virus in the community. I mean, we've gone to every state and tried to find, is there a specific number that I could say to Superintendent Rust, okay, if you get this much in your community, you should close schools. Nobody has that metric. Nobody has anything like that. And we've tried to see if we could figure it out. And there's really not anything we can give you that can help you with that. It's going to be looking at the state and making decisions. And so these plans, even if something happened next week that things were closed, these plans will be used later on. So don't feel like you're spinning your wheels. I think these plans will be used as we gear back up if there was a closure.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
Great questions and feedback, and you all are saying things on the minds of everyone else. So thank you for that. We ran over today, but certainly worth it. Thank you all for your participation as always. I do want to leave you with this. We've had already great conversations with Dr. Glass. You all are really going to enjoy getting to know him. He is already engaged, and even though he's running Jeffco schools in Colorado right now and will be until September 14th, I'm marking the calendar down. He is engaged and excited and reading and monitoring Kentucky social media. And so just a lot to look forward to there, and we'll continue to keep you posted. As we get close to August, he's going to have some contract days. He can come in August and do Kentucky-related activities and duties, and then, of course, starting here September 14th. So just wanted to send that message to you all from him, and he looks forward to meeting all of you in person or at least through a phone call, hopefully soon. Thanks, everyone, and feel free to let us know if you have any additional questions or issues. Don't forget the exit slip. That is helpful to us. And the information from today's meeting is also on the SAC, Superintendent Advisory Council web page under the Commissioner's item on the KDE website. Have a good rest of the day. Next meeting is August 3rd. Take care.